A German shepherd discovered in an abandoned property, so traumatized he wouldn't let anyone near him. For months, he huddled in the corner of his kennel while potential adopters passed him by. But what happened when one special visitor arrived at the shelter defied everything the staff thought possible. Get ready for a true story that will change how you see the incredible bond between humans and dogs. Riverside County Animal Shelter in California was operating beyond capacity in July 2021. The nationwide surge in pandemic pet surrenders had pushed the facility to its limits. For shelter director Marlene Gutierrez, a 20-year veteran of animal welfare, the arrival of yet another rescue case seemed like just one more challenge in an overwhelming day. "We have absolutely no space," she explained to Animal Control Officer Luis Vasquez as he carried in a crate. "The euthanasia list already has 15 dogs this week." Luis shook his head. "You'll want to make room for this one." Marlene property foreclosure in India. Owner walked away months ago from the looks of it. The rescue was a severely emaciated German shepherd, approximately 3 years old. He had survived by drinking from a leaking garden hose and scavenging whatever he could find in the overgrown yard where he'd been abandoned. His collar had embedded into his neck as he grew, requiring immediate surgical removal. Dr. Caitlin Chen, the shelter's lead veterinarian, documented the extensive list of medical issues: advanced malnutrition, with a body score of 2 out of 9, severe dehydration, requiring IV fluids, multiple untreated wounds, hookworms, ear infections, and pressure sores. "Physically, we can rehabilitate him," she told Marlene after the initial treatment was complete. "But I'm concerned about his psychological state. He's exhibiting extreme fear responses. Unlike many rescued dogs who seek human contact despite abuse, this shepherd, temporarily named Shadow by the medical team, showed profound terror at human proximity. When approached in his kennel, he would press himself into the furthest corner, his body trembling violently. He would not make eye contact, would not approach the front of the kennel even for food, and responded to any attempt to leash him with frozen terror. It's as if he's shut down completely," observed Kelsey Martinez, the shelter's behavioral specialist, after her third attempt to connect with the shepherd. For 2 weeks, the staff made little progress despite their best efforts. Shadow would eat only when the kennel was completely empty of human presence. The security cameras captured his movement only during the quietest overnight hours, when he would finally leave his corner to pace in tight, anxious circles. "We're running out of options," Marlene acknowledged during a staff meeting in early August. "If we can't find a specialized rescue to take him by Friday, we may need to make a difficult decision." That Thursday afternoon, one day before the deadline, Kelsey made one final attempt to reach Shadow. Rather than approaching the kennel directly, she simply sat on the floor in the corridor outside her, back against the opposite wall, reading aloud from a paperback novel. For nearly an hour, she pretended to ignore the German shepherd while maintaining a calm presence. When she finally stood to leave, she noticed something that gave her pause. Shadow remained in his corner, but his eyes were now tracking her movement. For the briefest moment, their gazes met the first eye contact he had initiated since his arrival. "I need 48 more hours," she told Marlene, her voice urgent. "I think there's still someone in there." Reluctantly, Marlene agreed to the extension. Neither of them could have anticipated that the following day would bring an unexpected visitor who would change Shadow's story forever. Claire Winslow hadn't planned to visit the shelter that Friday morning. At 34, her position as a physical therapist at Eisenhower Medical Center kept her busy, and her recent divorce had left her focusing on rebuilding her life in a small rental cottage in Palm Desert. A dog was definitely not on her agenda. "I'm just dropping off some old towels and blankets," she explained to the volunteer at the front desk. "My mum used to volunteer here years ago." Mike Russell, the weekend supervisor, overheard the conversation. "We appreciate the donation. Would you like a quick tour? We've made a lot of upgrades since your mum's time." Claire hesitated, then nodded. "I have a few minutes. The tour proceeded through the newly renovated adoption areas where playful puppies and sociable adult dogs eagerly approached their kennel doors, seeking attention. Claire smiled and offered gentle words to each, but none sparked any particular connection. "That's most of our adoption-ready pets," Mike said, as they neared the end of the corridor. "The area beyond is mostly for medical cases and behaviorally challenged dogs who aren't ready for adoption." "Yet mind if we peek anyway?" Claire asked. Mom always had a soft spot. For the tough cases, Mike hesitated. "Sure, but please stay back from the kennel doors. Some of these dogs are still working through fear or aggression issues." As they walked through the rehabilitation section, Mike briefly explained each case. A dog recovering from surgery, another being treated for heartworm, a pair of malnourished puppies gaining weight before adoption. Then they reached Shadow's kennel. "This is our most challenging case," Mike said quietly. "German Shepherd, about 3 found abandoned. He's been here almost 3 weeks and still won't come out of that corner. We're hoping a rescue group might have the resources for extensive rehabilitation." Claire stopped thinking about the huddled figure in the dim corner catching her attention. Shadow was pressed against the wall, his amber eyes visible in the shadows, watching them wearily. "What's his story?" she asked. "We don't know details, but based on his behavior, we suspect prolonged abuse and isolation. He's never shown aggression, just extreme fear. Most concerning is his complete withdrawal. He won't engage with humans at all." Claire stood silently watching the shepherd. Then, without asking permission, she sat down cross-legged on the floor outside the kennel, her back against the opposite wall. Coincidentally, the same position Kelsey had taken the previous day. "What are you doing?" Mike asked. Surprised. "I'm not sure," Claire admitted. "Just giving him some space while still being present. Do you mind if I just sit here for a few minutes?" Mike checked his watch. "I need to help with medication rounds, but I can come back in about 15 minutes if that works." Claire nodded, her eyes never leaving the shepherd. After Mike left, she sat in silence, occasionally glancing at her phone, but mostly just being present, making no demands on the frightened dog. 10 minutes passed with no visible change. Shadow remained frozen in his corner, though his eyes never left Claire. Then, almost imperceptibly, he shifted his weight. It wasn't movement toward her, just a slight relaxation of his rigid posture. When Mike returned, he found Claire still sitting quietly. "Any change?" he whispered. "Not really," she replied softly. "But I'd like to come back tomorrow if that's okay." Mike looked surprised. "Sure, but he's probably going to be the same tomorrow. These cases take months of work." Claire stood, brushing off her jeans. "I understand. I just feel like I should come back." As she gathered her purse to leave, she glanced once more at the kennel. Shadow had shifted slightly now, watching her departure, with what almost appeared to be curiosity. What Claire couldn't articulate even to herself was why this particular dog had captured her attention. Perhaps it was something in his eyes, or perhaps it was something deeper, a recognition that neither she nor anyone at the shelter could yet understand. Claire returned to the shelter the following morning, arriving just as they opened. She came prepared this time, bringing a folding camp chair, a book, and a small Bluetooth speaker playing soft, classical music equipment she's sometimes used with her most anxious physical therapy patients. "I wasn't sure you'd really come back," Kelsey said. Meeting her at the front desk, Mike had filled the staff in on Claire's interest in Shadow. "Honestly, I wasn't sure either," Claire admitted, "but I couldn't stop thinking about him last night." Kelsey led her back to Shadow's kennel. The German Shepherd was in his usual corner, but he seemed to recognize Claire immediately, his ears shifting slightly forward, a subtle change that didn't escape Kelsey's trained eye. "That's interesting," she noted. "He's unusually alert to your arrival." Claire set up her chair about 6 feet from the kennel door, positioning it at an angle rather than directly facing Shadow. She placed the small speaker nearby, keeping the volume low, just enough to provide gentle background sounds. "Do you mind if I just sit with him for a while?" she asked. Kelsey nodded. "I'll check in periodically. Just remember, no sudden movements, no direct eye contact for extended periods, and please don't attempt to enter the kennel without staff present." For the next 3 hours, Claire simply existed in Shadow's presence. She read her book aloud occasionally, her voice soft and measured. Sometimes she worked quietly on her laptop, catching up on patient notes. During these periods, she pretended to ignore Shadow completely, though she remained acutely aware of his presence. Around noon, Kelsey returned with a sandwich for Claire. "Any changes, what?" she asked, keeping her voice low. Claire nodded slightly. "He moved to the middle of the kennel about an hour ago. He's been watching me, but returns to his corner whenever other people walk by." Kelsey peered carefully into the kennel. Shadow was indeed closer than she had ever seen him voluntarily position himself. "That's remarkable progress," she said, trying to contain her professional excitement. After Kelsey left, Claire continued her quiet presence. She began softly talking to Shadow about neutral topics, her morning routine, the book she was reading, the weather, never looking directly at him, simply allowing him to become accustomed to her voice. The watershed moment came shortly after 2 p.m. Claire had been silently reading for almost 30 minutes when she sensed movement. Looking up with careful peripheral vision, she saw that Shadow had approached the front of the kennel. He still maintained distance from the door, but he was standing watching her with an intensity that felt different from fear. Moving very slowly, Claire shifted her chair slightly closer to the kennel. Shadow watched but didn't retreat. She began reading aloud again, her voice soft and rhythmic. When Marlene came to check on the situation, she stopped several yards away, stunned by what she was seeing. "I've never seen him this far from his corner," she whispered to Kelsey, who had joined her. "What did she do?" "Nothing," Kelsey replied. "That's what's so remarkable. She just existed near him patiently without demands." Before leaving that evening, Claire asked if she could return the next day. Marlene didn't hesitate. "Absolutely, I'm adjusting his status in our system right now. No decisions will be made about his future until we see where this goes." As Claire packed up her things, Shadow retreated to his corner, but the movement seemed less frantic, more deliberate. Their eyes met briefly as she turned to leave. "See you tomorrow," she said softly. What no one yet realized was that Shadow's response to Claire wasn't random. There was something specific about her that had penetrated his defenses, something that would soon reveal itself in an extraordinary way. Over the next 2 weeks, Claire visited Shadow every day, rearranging her work schedule to spend at least 2 hours at the shelter. Each day brought subtle but significant progress. By the end of the first week, Shadow would approach the kennel door when Claire arrived, though he'd quickly retreat if anyone else appeared. "I've never seen bonding happen this quickly with a traumatized dog," Kelsey observed while reviewing the security footage, "especially one who showed such profound shutdown behaviors. Claire couldn't explain it either. It feels like we've met before," she admitted, "like he somehow recognizes me, though I know that's impossible." By day 10, Shadow was accepting treats from Claire's hand through the kennel bars, a milestone that brought tears to Marlene's eyes. "We need to start thinking about next steps," the director suggested. "Would you consider fostering him?" Claire hesitated. "My landlord doesn't allow pets in my rental, but I'm looking for a new place anyway. If I found somewhere pet-friendly, I'd consider it." That afternoon, while sitting with Shadow, Claire received a phone call from a colleague at the medical center. Dr. Nathan Wells, a neurologist, was looking for a physical therapist for a special case, a veteran with a traumatic brain injury and PTSD who needed home-based therapy. The VA approved specialized care, but he's refusing to come to the hospital. "Would you be willing to do home visits 3 times a week? I know it's outside your normal schedule." Claire agreed to meet the patient the following day, scheduling the appointment for early morning so she could still visit Shadow afterward. The next morning, Claire arrived at a modest ranch house in La Quinta. A VA social worker met her outside. "Just so you are prepared," she explained, "Captain Jordan has been through extensive trauma IED explosion in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Physically, he's recovered well, but the PTSD and TBI have been challenging. He's withdrawn from almost all social contact." Claire nodded, familiar with such cases from her previous work at the VA hospital in San Diego. The social worker led her inside, where a man in his mid-30s sat in a wheelchair by the window. Though clearly muscular and otherwise healthy-looking, his posture was tense, his expression guarded. He acknowledged Claire with just a brief nod. "Captain Jordan. This is Claire Winslow, the physical therapist. Dr. Wells recommended the social worker," said. Claire approached, slowly keeping her movements predictable. "Good morning, Captain Jordan. It's nice to meet you." For a moment he seemed to study her intently. Then, unexpectedly, his expression shifted. "Have we met before?" he asked, his voice rough from disuse. "I don't think so," Claire replied. Setting down her therapy bag, "I moved to the area fairly recently." The session proceeded professionally, with Claire assessing his mobility and explaining the therapy plan. Captain Jordan remained reserved but cooperative unusually. So, according to the social worker, who whispered to Claire as they scheduled the next appointment, "He hasn't engaged that well with any provider since I took his case." Later that afternoon, as Claire sat outside Shadow's kennel, she noticed something odd. She'd worn the same clothes from her morning appointment, and Shadow seemed particularly interested in sniffing her through the kennel bars, especially her shoes and the hem of her pants. On impulse, she asked Kelsey, "Has Shadow had any history with military personnel that you know of?" Kelsey looked surprised. "We don't know anything about his background, why?" "Just wondering," Claire replied, watching as Shadow continued to investigate her scent with unusual intensity. 2 days later, Claire arrived at Captain Jordan's house for their second session. As she approached the door, she heard barking from inside. Ferocious, desperate barking. The social worker met her outside looking stressed. "He's having a rough day, nightmares last night." He mentioned a dog. Apparently he worked with a military dog in Afghanistan. The PTSD episode seems connected to losing the dog during the explosion. Claire's heart began racing. Did he mention what kind of dog a German shepherd named Shadow? Claire could barely focus during Captain Jordan's therapy session. Her mind was racing with possibilities. Could it be the same dog? It seemed impossible. Yet something kept nagging at her. "Your dog in Afghanistan?" she finally asked, as they finished the session. "What happened to him?" "Captain Ryan." Jordan's face darkened. "Shadow was a specialized search dog, not officially mine. He belonged to the military, but we worked together for 2 years. After the IED, I was evacuated immediately. They told me later that Shadow had run off after the explosion, likely disoriented, never found." He paused, his voice tightening. "I requested to stay and search for him, but my injuries were too severe." "What did he look like?" Claire asked carefully. "German shepherd. Black and tan scar on his right shoulder from an earlier mission." He looked at her curiously. "Why all these questions?" Claire took a deep breath. "This might sound crazy, but I've been visiting a German shepherd at the county shelter. He was found abandoned, extremely traumatized. No one can get near him except me." Jordan's expression remained skeptical. "Lots of German shepherds end up in shelters. This one has a scar on his right shoulder," Claire said quietly. The change in Jordan's face was instantaneous. Shock, disbelief, and a flash of hope, quickly tempered by doubt. "That's not possible. Shadow was in Afghanistan 3 years ago. Military dogs sometimes get brought back and adopted out," Claire suggested. "Or he could have been shipped back for medical treatment and somehow got lost in the system. It happens." Jordan's hands gripped his wheelchair. "Armrests. Do you have a picture?" Claire showed him several photos she'd taken of Shadow at the shelter. Jordan studied them intently, his breathing quickening. "I can't tell for sure," he said finally, "but the markings look right. There's one way to find out," Claire replied. "Would you be willing to come to the shelter an hour later?" Claire had made all the arrangements. Marlene had agreed to a private visit after regular hours, and Jordan's social worker had helped him into Claire's car, his wheelchair folded in the trunk. When that day arrived, Kelsey met them at the side entrance. "I've moved him to the meet and greet room," she explained. "It's quieter there, but please understand if he shows signs of stress, we'll need to end the session immediately." Jordan nodded, his face tense, as Claire pushed his wheelchair down the corridor outside the meet and greet room. She stopped. "Ready?" she asked softly. Jordan took a deep breath and nodded. Kelsey opened the door, and Claire wheeled Jordan inside. Shadow was at the far end of the room, still cautious in the unfamiliar environment. At first, he didn't seem to notice them. His attention focused on a toy Claire had brought previously. Then Jordan spoke a single word in a command tone completely different from his normal voice. Attention Shadow's reaction was instantaneous. His head snapped up, ears fully erect. For a long moment he stared at Jordan, motionless, except for his nose, working overtime, processing the scent. "Shadow, come," Jordan said, his voice breaking slightly. What happened next left everyone in the room, breathless. Shadow the dog, who wouldn't approach anyone who had spent weeks pressed into corners, avoiding human contact, launched himself across the room. The transformation was complete and immediate. His entire body language changed from fearful to exuberant. As he reached Jordan, nearly knocking over the wheelchair in his excitement, Jordan buried his face in the shepherd's neck, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs as Shadow wed and licked and pressed against him, trying to climb into his lap, despite his size. "I think that answers the question," Kelsey whispered to Claire, both women wiping away tears. The mystery of how a military working dog from Afghanistan ended up abandoned in California would never be fully solved. Through Jordan's VA contacts and the military's working dog program, they pieced together a partial timeline. Shadow had indeed been found after the explosion, injured but alive, and eventually transported back to the US for rehabilitation at Lackland Air Force Base in Texas. Deemed unsuitable for continued military service due to his own trauma symptoms, he had been adopted through a private organization that placed retired military dogs. From there the trail went cold, perhaps multiple homes, an owner who couldn't handle his special needs, ultimately abandonment. What mattered was that Shadow, whose official military designation they discovered was Teeth 167, nicknamed Shadow by Jordan for his habit of staying close, had found his person again. The reunion created its own challenges. Jordan lived alone in a single-story house, still struggling with his injuries and PTSD. Shadow, while immediately responsive to Jordan, remained fearful of other people and new environments. Both were wounded warriors who needed support. Claire became the bridge between them. Her physical therapy sessions with Jordan continued now, with Shadow eagerly participating, somehow sensing which exercises Jordan needed encouragement to complete. The German Shepherd, who had hidden from human touch, now gently nudged Jordan's arm when he began to flag. During therapy, "He's doing the same job he was trained for," Claire observed after a particularly successful session. Military dogs are taught to guide, support, and sometimes physically assist their handlers. He's remembered his purpose. Within a month, Jordan's physical progress had accelerated dramatically. The motivation to care for Shadow pushed him to greater independence, standing from his wheelchair for longer periods, eventually using just a cane for short distances around the house. Shadow's transformation was equally remarkable. His fear of strangers diminished significantly, though he remained protective of Jordan. His physical health improved, his coat regaining its luster, muscles rebuilding over his once protruding ribs. Kelsey visited regularly to help with Shadow's continued training, particularly in managing his protective instincts appropriately. "His behavior makes perfect sense now," she explained. "Military working dogs form incredibly strong bonds with their handlers. Being separated from Captain Jordan, especially after a traumatic event, would have been psychologically devastating." The shelter formally transferred Shadow's ownership to Jordan through the Pets for Vets program, waiving all fees. The local newspaper ran a front-page story about their reunion, prompting an outpouring of community support. A local contractor volunteered to build a secure fence around Jordan's property. A pet supply store provided a lifetime of free food. For Shadow, Claire found herself spending more time at Jordan's home than required by her professional duties. What had begun as therapy sessions evolved into shared meals, movie nights, and long conversations. Jordan gradually revealed pieces of his story, the person he had been before his injuries, his dreams for the future that had been derailed, his struggle to find purpose again. "Shadow recognized something in you," he told Claire one evening as they sat on his patio watching the shepherd patrol the newly fenced yard. "From the first day at the shelter, he knew you were someone he could trust." Claire smiled. "I think maybe we recognized something in each other, pieces that needed healing 6 months after Shadow and Jordan's reunion." Claire arrived at their house for what was officially her last physical therapy session. Jordan had progressed beyond all expectations, now walking unassisted for moderate distances, even occasionally jogging short stretches with Shadow in the early mornings. The door opened before she could knock Jordan, standing tall without support, Shadow by his side, both of them looking healthier and more vibrant than she could have imagined during those first encounters. "Ready for your final evaluation?" she asked, trying to keep her voice professionally neutral despite the complex emotions she felt. The session went perfectly, with Jordan meeting or exceeding all his therapeutic goals. When they finished, he handed her an envelope. "What's this?" she asked. "Open it." Inside was a job offer from the VA's new canine therapy program in Palm Desert. They were looking for a physical therapist to help develop protocols for veterans working with service dogs, someone with Claire's unique combination of physical therapy expertise and understanding of canine behavior. "I might have mentioned your name to some people," Jordan admitted with a smile. "They're creating the position with you in mind." Claire stared at the letter, stunned by the opportunity to combine her professional skills with her newfound passion. "There's something else," Jordan said, suddenly looking